They didn't announce themselves with lights in the sky or massive ships hanging above cities. We didn't see a single star blink out. We didn't even know they existed until one night, in a cramped government lab buried under 30 meters of concrete, we heard them talking. It was supposed to be a routine calibration run. The array had been online for 6 months, mostly catching bursts of cosmic radiation, whispers from pulsars, and the occasional long-dead signal from our own satellites. The data came in raw, unromantic, long strings of numbers that only meant something after hours of processing. I was sipping cold coffee, staring at yet another pattern of static, when a repetition caught my attention. For bursts, pause, 6 bursts, pause for again. It was too precise, too deliberate. We ran it through filters, checked for Earth-based interference, cross-referenced with orbital traffic. Nothing. Then Elaine came in, hair a mess, eyes bloodshot, clutching her tablet like it might vanish. She'd been working on a side project, running intercepted bursts through a linguistic model. "It's not noise," she said. "It's a log, a conversation." At first, we thought it was some deep space probe from another nation, maybe a classified test. Then the content began to emerge, not in full sentences, but in shards. Designation, type 7 biosphere, estimated biomass yield. High, preparatory cycle, initiate. The words had no emotion, no metaphor, just cold classification, the way you'd talk about timber or. By the time we realized what we'd stumbled on, we'd been listening for 3 weeks. The array caught them again and again, voices carried on frequencies so tight, so alien, they almost slid past our detection. They didn't know we could hear them. They didn't know we existed as more than a data point. We dug into the archives and found that the array itself was the result of another age's paranoia. Back in the 1980s, during the Cold War, a classified satellite network had been deployed to detect rogue nuclear launches. After the fall of the Soviet Union, those satellites were mothballed, then quietly handed over to civilian agencies. In 2022, Project Whisper was born, ostensibly to search for deep space signals. Unofficially, its purpose was to be the first line of contact detection. Nobody expected it to actually work. Elaine and I weren't alone. Commander Reza Holt was assigned as military liaison. Though he never wore the uniform in the lab, he had the kind of calm presence that made you think of thick steel doors and locked vaults. Someone who could hear the worst news in the world and still pour himself a steady cup of coffee. When we played him the cleaned-up transmission, he didn't ask if it was real. He asked, "How long have they been planning this?" It took months to fully grasp their timetable. The aliens, though we didn't have a name for them yet, operated on scales we weren't used to. They planned in decades, centuries even, from what we could piece together. They'd identified Earth at least 50 years ago, marked in their records, and only now were moving into the harvest phase. That phrase, harvest, sat wrong in my stomach. The signals weren't meant for us. They were logistical updates between ships and bases somewhere beyond our reach. 1,000 light years away? 10? We couldn't tell. But every update we caught painted a clearer picture. The harvest involved stripping Earth down to bedrock, reducing everything alive to raw biomass, shipping it off to wherever they needed it. They didn't hate us. There was no malice in their tone, no ideological crusade. To them, we weren't even an enemy. We were inventory. And that, Holt said, made them far more dangerous than any conqueror with a grudge. The decision of what to do next was anything but simple. The small group inside Project Whisperer split almost immediately. One camp argued that broadcasting back, or even letting them know we'd overheard, would be suicidal. If they didn't realize humans could parse their communications, we could buy time. The other camp, led quietly but firmly by Holt, said time wasn't enough. Preparation was the only way forward. The higher-ups eventually got involved. Representatives from intelligence agencies, defense departments, and a few scientists who had the right clearances. They gathered in an unremarkable conference room, blinds drawn, the hum of the air conditioning the only background noise. After an hour of heated debate, Holt spoke up. If your neighbor's standing at your fence, measuring your land, and talking about what crops to plant, you don't wait for them to knock on your door. You act. That line stuck with me. We doubled our monitoring efforts. Every intercepted signal was cataloged, decoded, and cross-checked. Patterns emerged. They referred to Earth as Sector 12 Delta, Type 7 Biosphere. The designation suggested they'd done this before, hundreds, maybe thousands of times. The term Type 7 seemed to mean high biodiversity, high biomass yield, moderate native defense capability. We were just one more farm on their map. Then one night, Elaine found something chilling. Buried in a logistics burst was a phrase we couldn't mistake. Eradication window, 47 planetary cycles. Planetary cycles, years. They'd given themselves less than 5 decades to strip Earth clean. That was their version of urgency. The strangest part was how open they were, relatively speaking. Their encryption was minimal. Not because they were careless, but because they didn't expect anyone here could understand them. It was arrogance disguised as efficiency. And maybe that was our first advantage. For weeks after that, I started waking up at odd hours, certain that I'd missed something, that the signals were slipping past us. I'd rush to the lab, sometimes in the middle of the night, and pore over data. It wasn't obsession, it was survival. Then came the first anomaly. We caught a burst unlike the others. It was shorter, denser, layered with harmonics. When we processed it, the translation software gave us only one sentence, perfect, precise English. Begin the harvest when the blue world falls silent. The room went still. Elaine replayed it again and again. There was no distortion, no translation artifact. They'd spoken in our language. It wasn't a broadcast of us. At least, we didn't think so. More likely, it was a note between alien commanders, referencing intercepted human transmissions, showing off that they could mimic us. But that one sentence hit like a knife in the dark. We didn't know then whether they'd noticed our listening. But in that moment, the idea of being invisible seemed less certain. They sealed the project under tighter locks than ever before. After that English phrase bled through the static, nobody trusted the veil of invisibility we thought we had. We weren't sure whether the words were an accident, a taunt, or a sign. They already knew we were listening. The council, because by then it was no longer a handful of analysts and scientists, but a body of representatives from the most powerful nations, decided on one principle: secrecy above all else. Panic would do the aliens' work for them before the first ship even arrived. The Continuity Council, as it came to be called, wasn't public, wasn't accountable, and never acknowledged itself outside the deepest vaults. It existed only to buy humanity a chance to endure. That chance would depend on two things: how much we could learn from intercepted transmissions, and how well we could prepare without revealing ourselves. Recruitment became the first priority. Whisper had been staffed by a skeleton crew of linguists, mathematicians, and analysts, but now entire disciplines were folded quietly under its umbrella. Computer scientists from universities suddenly found themselves invited to classified research initiatives. Retired intelligence officers were pulled back into service. Hackers who had once been hunted by governments were now paid in quiet fortunes to find ways into signals that weren't even human. Each person was vetted not only for skill, but for the ability to keep their mouth shut for the rest of their life. I lived a double existence in those years. By day, I kept up my cover in telecommunications, filing dry reports and fixing lines of code no one cared about. By night, I was inside the vault, parsing alien chatter. My friends drifted away. Family thought I had gone into some obscure government post, and I stopped correcting them. What could I say? That I was eavesdropping on beings who measured life in biomass yield? Piece by piece, their doctrine unfolded. The aliens weren't conquerors in the sense we understood. They didn't thrive on war. They avoided prolonged campaigns. Their fleets operated with clinical efficiency. Arrive, scan, deploy drones, modify the atmosphere to optimize extraction, leave nothing behind that could grow again. They didn't waste resources on extermination for its own sake. Their doctrine was harvest, not conquest. But even the most efficient system has weaknesses. Holt pushed us to find them, drilling the lesson into everyone who passed the vault. Machines fail. Patterns can be broken. If they're arrogant enough to think we can't understand them, then they'll never prepare for what happens when we do. It was Elaine who first noticed the rigidity in their communications. Every signal followed strict formats, nearly identical structures repeated again and again. Even when they spoke in different contexts, logistics, navigation, status reports, the underlying pattern was rigid. We realized their command hierarchy leaned heavily on automation. The flesh and blood commanders issued broad directives, but the execution was delegated to centralized artificial systems. Ships, drones, atmospheric processors, all moved in predictable concert because their orders were generated and managed by machines. The implication was terrifying and promising in equal measure. Terrifying, because it meant their capacity for coordination dwarfed anything we could imagine. Promising, because it meant if those machine minds were disrupted, the whole edifice could stumble. So we set about learning how to lie to them. The first efforts were clumsy. Attempt at mimicking their signals resulted in garbled echoes that any machine would flag as corruption. But with every failure, the linguists and codebreakers learned more about the underlying logic, patterns of checksum, redundancy layers, harmonics stacked for error correction. The aliens had built their system to be resilient against random noise, but not against deliberate deception. After a year of experiments, we could produce short bursts of signals that were accepted by their protocols as authentic. For the first time, humanity held a weapon that could wound them without firing a shot. Meanwhile, the world outside whisper went on as if nothing were happening. Wars simmered, elections came and went, economies boomed and cracked. The council had made its choice. The public could not be told. Elaine struggled with that decision more than any of us. She argued that a species warned might be a species stronger. Holt countered that panic would do more damage than preparation. On that, the council agreed with him. Humanity's defense would be forged in secret, and if we survive, history could judge the decision later. Our biggest breakthrough came not from signals, but from matter. In 2032, an irregularity was detected on the edge of the solar system. At first, it was logged as another icy body, until its trajectory betrayed it. Too straight, too precise. A probe, a scout they'd left behind decades earlier, perhaps waiting for the fleet's arrival. The Council authorized what became the most clandestine space mission in history. A modified interceptor was launched under the cover of a climate monitoring satellite. It rendezvoused, captured the object, and brought it down to a facility in Nevada. The probe was no larger than a van, built from alloys our instruments could barely analyze, its surfaces etched with patterns that shifted in strange ways under light. Inside were processors operating on principles that felt like magic until our engineers realized they were still bound by physics, just orders of magnitude more efficient than ours. The Council forbade any attempt to replicate it directly, fearing it might trigger hidden protocols. But its mere existence proved something crucial. Their machines could be taken, studied, subverted. Holt said it best when he looked at the disassembled probe. They've already given us their first weapon. We just have to learn how to use it against them. The years that followed were the silent war. A war fought not with fleets or armies, but with bits of intercepted chatter, lines of code, scraps of alien metal. We weren't firing shots, but every step was an act of defiance. We listened, we learned. We bent our world toward readiness while pretending nothing was wrong. Our strategies broadened. Jammers were tested. Devices that could flood a spectrum with noise fine-tuned to disrupt the harmonics their drones relied on. Decoys were prepared. Whether satellites that, with a flip of hidden protocols, could become nodes of electronic warfare. Even civilian infrastructure was quietly co-opted. Fiber lines, mobile towers, and internet backbones were embedded with dormant systems designed to awaken during invasion and flood alien receivers with falsehoods. Humanity was laying down a minefield across the very spectrum they used to speak. Not everything went smoothly. In 2035, we intercepted transmissions suggesting suspicion. Phrases we had never seen before appeared. Anomalous signal environment. Probability of hostile observation. Low but non-zero. That one word, hostile, sent a chill through the vault. It meant they considered the possibility, however faint, that something here was aware of them. They arrived without warning, but we had been waiting for years. The first sign wasn't a flash in the sky or a sudden eclipse. It was a change in the signals. Chatter spiked, short bursts carrying coordinates we'd never seen before. Fleet movements compressed their normal timelines. Every message stripped of the slow, careful cadence they'd kept for decades. Holt read the translations and said only one thing. They're here. Tracking stations hidden across the globe picked up the ships before civilian telescopes could. They emerged at the edge of the moon's orbit. Sleek silhouettes sliding out of the void, each one the size of a city. They didn't form a line or announce themselves. They simply began to move inward, as if the planet below were already theirs. The Council activated the continuity protocols. Power grids went dark in coordinated blackouts. Civilian communication networks were silenced, replaced by emergency routing buried deep in infrastructure. From space, Earth looked like a dead world. No radio chatter, no heat bloom from major cities. To them, we were making good on that one condition in their English phrase years earlier, when the blue world falls silent. But silence was our weapon now, not our surrender. Their drones were the first to descend. They came in swarms, each one a skeletal frame of alloy and light, scanning everything in their path. They didn't open fire at once. They were measuring, mapping, feeding data back to their command AI. That was when our traps woke. Ground-based transmitters disguised as civilian towers flooded their networks with ghost signals. Drones pivoted midair, chasing phantom targets into empty deserts, circling invisible enemies above oceans. In orbit, our disguised weather satellites dropped their covers, revealing railgun batteries and high-powered jammers. The first salvo tore into one of their carrier craft, not destroying it, but crippling its relay system. The chatter we intercepted spiked into confusion. They hadn't anticipated resistance, at least not at this scale, not from a species they thought of as biomass. Holt's voice over the encrypted network was steady, deliberate. Keep them guessing. Never let them see the whole picture. They adapted quickly. Drones stopped chasing ghosts and began sweeping methodically, burning through decoys and hitting real targets. Our first railgun emplacement was destroyed within hours. But for every loss, our counterstrikes grew sharper. Submarines lying silent for weeks launched torpedoes reprogrammed with alien navigation algorithms, slipping past point defense grids and detonating inside their hulls. One carrier vanished in a silent flash, its wreckage tumbling into the atmosphere. We were bleeding them, but the scale of the fleet made each kill feel like scratching the skin of a leviathan. That was when the ghost fleets came into play. Years of mimicry culminated in a single, massive injection into their comms net. Hundreds of false signatures, fleet positions, distress calls, urgent redeployments from other sectors. The alien command AI parsed the data, believed it, and began to redirect ships away from Earth. They thought a rival power was striking at their holdings elsewhere. The sudden thinning of their presence gave us the opening we needed. Coordinated strikes from orbit and ground crippled their AI nodes one by one. Without central coordination, their drones faltered, moving in erratic patterns that exposed them to concentrated fire. We didn't have the luxury of mercy. Every drone downed was stripped for parts. Every fragment sent to engineers desperate to understand it before the next wave. Their retreat wasn't surrender. It was a recalculation. They pulled back to lunar orbit, regrouped, then accelerated away on a vector we couldn't follow. The wreckage they left behind was both a victory and a warning. In the hours that followed, the blackout lifted. Cities flickered back to life, but the people who lived in them had no idea how close the harvest had come. The council debated disclosure, weighing the danger of public knowledge against the reality that we were now a known quantity to our enemy. Elaine argued that secrecy had bought us survival, but survival wasn't the same as safety. Holt said only that this was the first battle in a longer war. In the quiet after the invasion, we cataloged what they'd left behind. Shards of hull plating that resisted every tool we had. Data cores fused by overload but still humming faintly. A drone intact enough to reactivate, though we kept it dormant for fear it might call home. Their technology was beyond us in many ways, but no longer untouchable. We had fought them and taken pieces of their strength. I thought of that first intercepted transmission all those years ago, the cold classification of our world as biomass yield. If they came again, and they would not find livestock waiting. They would find a species that had heard them, understood them, and learn to speak back in the only language that mattered,